The private hospital suite was unlike any ordinary patient's room. It looked more like the suite of a five-star hotel. Expensive leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city skyline, and a mahogany cabinet stocked with imported crystal glasses. Yet despite all this wealth and grandeur, the air in the room was thick with bitterness and despair. On the bed lay Gregory Hale, a name that once commanded fear in boardrooms across the country. The man had built an empire of steel and concrete. Skyscrapers, factories and corporations all bore his mark. But now, stripped of his commanding voice and towering presence, he looked like a shadow of himself. His once broad shoulders sagged, his sharp eyes dulled by illness, and his skin clung too tightly to his bones. Still, his pride remained untouched. "I said no and I mean it," Gregory snapped, his voice hoarse but firm as a nurse timidly adjusted his IV stand. "Stop bringing your tests, your machines, your drugs. I don't need any of it. If this is my end, then let it come." The nurse, a young woman barely in her 20s, froze mid-step. She had heard stories of Gregory Hale long before he became her patient. How he fired employees without a second thought. How he crushed competitors in ruthless takeovers. How he once threw a cup of coffee at a junior executive for being 5 minutes late. Even weakened, the man's presence was intimidating. "Sir, it's the doctor's orders." She stammered softly. "I don't care whose orders they are," he barked, his voice echoing through the room. "This is my life, and I'll decide what happens to it. Now get out." The nurse glanced at the other staff in the room, who exchanged nervous looks. They had seen this before. Every treatment offered was refused. Every attempt to reason with him ended in a tirade. Gregory Hale was a man who lived on his own terms, and apparently, he intended to die on them too. As the nurse hurried out, a heavy silence filled the room. Gregory leaned back against the pillows, his breath ragged but his eyes burning with stubborn defiance. On the bedside table sat a framed photograph turned face down. No one dared touch it, but occasionally, when Gregory thought no one was watching, his gaze would linger on it with a flash of something softer. Regret, perhaps, or sorrow. Outside the suite, in the brightly lit corridor, doctors whispered about him. "He refuses everything. Chemo, surgery, even basic monitoring. He's signing his own death sentence." Well, what do you expect? A man like that, a bitter, no family left. Not everyone shared their resignation. That afternoon, as the staff shuffled nervously around the edges of Gregory's care, the door opened. And a new figure entered. Her presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. Dr. Lara Monroe, young, striking, with an air of calm authority that didn't need to be spoken. Unlike the others, she didn't shrink under Gregory's glare. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you?" "Another vulture waiting to pick at me with tests and needles." Ilara didn't flinch. She set her clipboard aside, walked closer, and said with quiet confidence, "I'm not here to force anything on you, Mr. Hale. I'm here to listen." It was the first time in days that someone had answered him without fear. Gregory's lips curled into a bitter half-smile. "Listen, that's a first. Most doctors hear nothing but the sound of their own brilliance." "Then maybe it's time you had a different kind of doctor," she replied evenly. For the first time, Gregory's defiance wavered. Not much. Just a flicker. He studied her carefully. She was different. Not intimidated by his wealth. Not desperate to please. She stood there as if she saw him not as a billionaire patient, but as a man. Still, his pride would not let him soften. He turned his face toward the window, his voice gravelly. "Don't waste your time, doctor. I've lived the way I wanted. I'll die the same way. And no one, not even you, will change that." Yet even as he said it, a shadow crossed his face, betraying something he didn't want anyone to see: fear. And Dr. Ilara Monroe noticed. The next morning, the hospital staff braced themselves for another battle of wills with Gregory Hale. His name had become a storm cloud that hung over the entire floor. Nurses carried his charts with trembling hands. Interns avoided his room whenever possible, and even senior physicians kept their visits brief, delivering clinical updates before retreating quickly. But Dr. Ilara Monroe wasn't deterred. She had spent the night reviewing his records: heart disease, failing liver, spreading cancer. All treatable with aggressive therapy, if only he allowed it. Most would have given up by now. But something in Gregory's eyes the day before, something buried beneath all his bitterness, had kept her thinking long after her shift ended. She walked into his room without hesitation. Gregory was seated in his armchair by the window, wrapped in a cashmere robe. The city skyline stretched beyond him, but he wasn't looking at it. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the glass of whiskey in his hand. Amber liquid catching the morning sun. "You know that's not exactly part of your prescribed diet," Alara remarked gently, setting her notes on the table. His eyes flicked toward her, sharp despite his frailty. "Whiskey kept me alive through 1,000 board meetings. I'll let it see me out. Or it could just speed the process up," she countered, pulling up a chair. "But I suppose that's what you want." A smirk ghosted across his lips. "Finally, a doctor who understands." Ilara folded her arms, studying him. "I don't think you want to die, Mr. Hale. Not really." He chuckled dryly, though it ended in a cough that shook his frame. "You're wrong, doctor. I've had everything, wealth, power, respect, and in the end, none of it matters. I sit in this gilded cage. And not one person truly cares whether I live or die. Do you know what it's like to be surrounded by people but still utterly alone?" Her eyes softened. "Yes," she said quietly. "More than you think." The words caught him off guard. For a moment, his mask slipped, and he looked at her not as a patient sizing up a doctor, but as a man glimpsing another soul who understood pain. But just as quickly, he hardened again, leaning back in his chair. "Don't play games with me, Dr. Monroe. You're here because it's your job. You care because you're paid to." "No," Alara said firmly, her voice steady. "I care because you're a human being. And whether you believe in or not, your life has value." Even now. Gregory turned away, his jaw tightening. On the side table sat that same framed photograph. Still face down. Alara noticed it. Her instincts told her it wasn't just a decoration, it was a wound. She leaned forward. "You keep refusing treatment, but not because you're unafraid of death. You refuse because you're afraid of living. Afraid of facing whatever's in that picture." His hand froze midair, fingers brushing the frame. For a moment, silence engulfed the room, heavy and suffocating. Then he slammed the photograph down, face still hidden, and growled, "Get out." But Alara didn't move. "You can push everyone else away, Mr. Hale," she said softly, "but I'm not going anywhere. You can rage, insult, threaten, but I will keep coming back. Because somewhere under all that anger, you don't want to be alone. And until you're ready to admit it, I'll be here." Gregory's breath hitched. He had built an empire on fear, keeping people at arm's length. Yet this woman, this young, beautiful doctor with fire in her eyes, stood her ground without flinching. He didn't know whether to hate her or admire her. Finally, with a bitter laugh, he muttered, "You're either the bravest doctor I've ever met or the most foolish." "Maybe both," Alara replied with a faint smile. "But I don't give up on my patients. And I'm not giving up on you." As she left the room, Gregory stared after her longer than he intended. For the first time in years, the walls he had built around himself had been touched. He poured the whiskey down the sink, not because she told him to, but because her words wouldn't stop echoing in his mind. The days that followed were a slow, uneasy dance between Gregory Hale and Dr. Alara Monroe. Every morning, she entered his suite with the same calm determination, never flinching at his sharp remarks or cold silences. And every evening, she returned, sometimes just sitting in quiet company. Other times coaxing words out of him like pulling stones from a river. The hospital staff whispered about her. Why waste time on him? He doesn't want help. She's going to burn out trying to fix that man. Or worse. She'll get herself in trouble with the board. They've already marked him as a non-compliant patient. But Alara ignored them. There was something in Gregory she couldn't turn away from. Beneath the arrogance, the venom, the stubborn refusal of treatment, she saw pain. And pain was something she understood too well. One evening, when the hallways outside had grown quiet, and the night shift was settling in, Alara walked into Gregory's room to find him sitting at his desk, staring at the turned-down photograph again. The amber glow of a bedside lamp illuminated his profile, sharp and gaunt. Without asking permission, she walked over and gently picked up the frame. "Don't," Gregory snapped, his voice raw. But it was too late, she had already seen it. The picture showed a younger Gregory, tall and commanding. his arm around a beautiful woman with kind eyes. A small boy, no older than 8, stood between them, his hand tightly clutching Gregory's. They looked like a family, whole, proud, unbroken. Ilara set the frame down carefully. Your wife. His chest rose sharply as if the question itself was a blade. He turned away, his eyes hard. She died. Years ago. Car accident. Ilara's voice softened. And your son? For a long time, Gregory didn't answer. His hands trembled slightly as they gripped the armrest of his chair. Finally, his words spilled out, low and heavy. He left me. He walked out and never looked back. Said I cared more about money than him. That I destroyed everything good in our family. The bitterness in his tone couldn't hide the grief that clung beneath it. His voice cracked, a sound so human, so vulnerable, it startled even him. Elara leaned forward. And is that true? His eyes flared. I built an empire for him, for both of them. Do you know what it cost me? The nights I worked until dawn, the deals I cut, the enemies I made, I gave them everything, and in the end, it wasn't enough. He slammed his fist onto the table, coughing violently from the effort. Ilara rushed to steady him, placing a hand on his shoulder. For a moment he let her. You gave them wealth, she said gently, but maybe what they wanted most was you. Her words silenced him. He sat slumped, breathing heavily, unable to meet her eyes. That night, when she returned to her office, Ilara made a decision that crossed the invisible line every doctor was trained never to cross. She began searching for Gregory's estranged son. It wasn't part of her job. It wasn't sanctioned by the hospital. If the board discovered she was meddling in a patient's personal life, she could be disciplined, or worse, lose her license. But something in her heart told her it was the only way. Gregory didn't need just medicine, he needed hope, and so, after her shifts, she used every resource she had, contacts, databases, even old colleagues from medical school with connections in law enforcement, to track him down. Finally, after days of searching, she found him. Daniel Hale, 32 years old, living in another state, working as a teacher. She drafted a letter. It wasn't medical, wasn't professional, it was personal. She told Daniel the truth that his father was dying, that his walls were crumbling, and that beneath the pride and cruelty, there was a man who regretted everything. She sealed it, her hands trembling. If the board ever found out, she'd be finished. But as she slid the letter into the outgoing mail slot, she whispered to herself, some risks are worth taking. Back in Gregory's room the next day, she noticed something had shifted. He was quieter, less combative. His sharp remarks softened into wary sighs. When she adjusted his IV line, he didn't swat her hand away. When she asked how he was feeling, he didn't snap. He just said, tired. For the first time since she met him, he let her sit beside him in silence, no battle to fight, no walls to guard. And though he didn't know it, a letter was already on its way that could change everything. The storm broke on a night when the hospital halls were eerily quiet. Rain lashed against the tall windows of Gregory Hale's suite, thunder rolling across the city. The machines beside his bed beeped steadily. But his breaths had grown shallow, uneven, like a clock winding down. Dr. Lara Monroe had just finished her late rounds when the call came through the intercom. Dr. Monroe, patient in suite 14 is coding. Repeat, patient in suite 14 is coding. Her heart seized. Suite 14. Gregory, her shoes pounded against the polished floor as alarms wailed. Nurses rushed past her, a crash cart rattling in their hands. When Ilara burst into the room, the sight made her blood run cold. Gregory was slumped in his chair, his face ashen, his body trembling violently. The monitors screamed with jagged lines, his pulse plummeting. A nurse shouted, his heart's failing. Muv. Ilara barked, shoving through to his side. She pressed her fingers to his neck, weak, fading. His body was giving up. Prepare epinephrine, she ordered. The staff hesitated. The charge nurse spoke quickly. Dr. Monroe, this file states he's refusing all interventions. DNR order is on record. Do not resuscitate. The words hit her like ice water. Gregory had signed it weeks ago, a legal declaration that he wanted no heroic measures taken. By law, the staff was bound to honor it. For a split second, Ilara froze. If she acted, she would be defying his wishes and breaking hospital policy. She could lose her license. She could be sued. She could destroy everything she had worked her whole life for. But then she looked at him. Not as a patient. Not as a name on a chart, but as a man who had finally, painfully, begun to let his guard down. A man who had whispered regrets into the silence of the night. A man who had more to say, if only he were given the chance. Her voice cut through the panic. No, not like this. Prepare for resuscitation. None. The nurses hesitated, torn between law and humanity. Elora grabbed the paddles herself, her hands steady even as her heart pounded. Charge to 200. Dr. Monroe, the board. Duel, she shouted. The machine whined to life. Elora pressed the paddles to Gregory's chest. His body jolted violently, then fell still. The monitor flatlined again. Charge 3 Harrow, she barked, sweat beading on her forehead. The nurse's hand hovered over the switch, then pressed it. Elora shocked him again. His chest arched, then collapsed, breathless. For a moment, nothing. Silence, except for the rain hammering the windows. Then beep. A faint, steady rhythm appeared on the monitor. Weak but there. His chest rose with a ragged breath. His fingers twitched. Relief washed over the room. The nurses exhaled as though they had been holding their breaths the entire time. But Elora wasn't relieved. She knew what she had done. She had crossed the line. If the hospital board discovered this, her career was finished. Saving Gregory Hale might cost her everything. As the team stabilized him, Elora leaned close to his ear, her voice barely above a whisper. You're not done yet, Gregory. Not until you face what you've been running from. Hours later, after the crisis had passed and the room had fallen quiet again, Gregory's eyes fluttered open. His gaze found Elora standing at his bedside, exhaustion written across her face. You, he rasped weakly. You saved me. Why? She met his gaze, unwavering. Because someone needed to show you your life is still worth fighting for. Even if it cost me mine. A single tear escaped the corner of his eye, sliding down his weathered cheek. For the first time in years, Gregory Hale, the untouchable titan of industry, looked utterly, profoundly human. And though he didn't know it yet, the very act that had saved him would soon spark a battle that could ruin her career. The morning after Gregory's collapse was unlike any other. Sunlight spilled into his suit, golden and soft, illuminating the once cold room with warmth. The beeping of the monitors was steady now. No longer shrieking with alarm but humming with fragile life. Gregory Hale lay propped up against the pillows, his skin pale yet alive, his breathing weak but steady. Dr. Elora Monroe sat beside him. Her posture straight but her face drawn with fatigue. She hadn't left his side since the night before, and the weight of what she had done hung heavy in the air. She had broken protocol, defied his DNR order, and risked her career. Gregory stirred, his eyes fluttering open. When they landed on Elora, there was no trace of the old hostility, only bewilderment, and gratitude. You shouldn't have saved me, he whispered hoarsely. I gave clear orders. You went against them. Elora's voice trembled, but her resolve was unwavering. I know. And if I'm punished for it, so be it. But I couldn't let you go like that. Not when I knew you weren't ready. He studied her, his lips trembling as if words warred with pride in his throat. At last, he managed. No one's ever fought for me like that. Not even my own son. As if on cue, there was a knock on the door. Both turned their heads. The nurse entered, hesitating. Dr. Monroe, there's a visitor for Mr. Hale. He says his name is Daniel. The air froze. Gregory's breath hitched, his eyes widened, raw with disbelief. Daniel. Elora's heart pounded. The letter she had sent, the risk she had taken, had reached him. Slowly, the door opened, and a tall man in his early 30s stepped in. His face was stern, his eyes a mirror of Gregory's but softened by years of distance. He held himself rigidly, as though unsure if he belonged here. Father and son locked eyes for the first time in over a decade. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was so thick it seemed to pulse in the room. Gregory's lips quivered, his voice breaking. You came. Daniel's jaw clenched. I almost didn't. The words were knives, but Gregory didn't flinch. He nodded slowly, as though he deserved them. I wouldn't have blamed you. I gave you every reason to hate me. I was cruel. To you, to your mother, to everything that mattered. His voice cracked, a sob catching in his throat. And I'd give all the money in the world to undo it. Daniel's face softened, the years of anger wrestling with the sight of his frail father. Broken, remorseful, human. You're still the same stubborn man, Daniel muttered, but his voice shook. Even dying, you can't stop trying to control the outcome. Gregory let out a weak laugh, though it dissolved into a cough. He wiped at his tears. Maybe. But if I die now, at least I'll have said this: I'm sorry, son. I failed you. And I don't deserve your forgiveness. Ilara stood quietly in the corner, tears brimming in her own eyes as she witnessed the raw reunion. She wanted to give them privacy, but Gregory reached out, his hand trembling. No. Stay. He whispered. You're the reason he's here. Daniel's eyes flicked to Ilara, surprise flickering across his face. You wrote me the letter. Ilara hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I couldn't let him leave this world without a chance to see you again. Daniel exhaled, his posture easing. He stepped closer to the bed, his eyes softening as they rested on his father. Finally, after years of silence, he reached out and grasped Gregory's hand. The old man broke, sobbing quietly as his son held onto him. Thank you. Gregory whispered over and over, clutching Daniel's hand as though it anchored him to life itself. In that fragile moment, wealth meant nothing, power meant nothing, only the bond of a father and son, once shattered, now trembling back to life, mattered. Days later, the hospital board summoned Dr. Monroe. Her violation of the DNR order had not gone unnoticed. A panel of stern-faced ministers prepared to strip her of her license. But before they could speak, the door swung open. Gregory Hale entered, supported by Daniel. He was frail, but his presence was commanding once more. You will not punish this doctor, he declared, his voice firm despite his weakness. She broke the rules, yes, but she saved my life. Not just my body, but my soul. If not for her, I would have died a bitter, empty man. And if you dare touch her career, I'll see to it that this hospital loses every cent of my fortune. The board exchanged nervous glances. No one argued. Ilara sat in stunned silence as Gregory turned to her, his expression softening. You risked everything for me, and now, I intend to spend whatever time I have left proving I was worth saving. In the weeks that followed, Gregory underwent treatments. Not with reluctance, but with a renewed will to live. He and Daniel rebuilt their bond. Slowly but steadily. And through it all, Ilara remained at Gregory's side, not just as his doctor, but as his anchor. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Gregory turned to her and said, You gave me a second chance. No wealth, no empire, no legacy could have done that. Only you. Ilara smiled softly, her heart full, and in that moment, Gregory Hale, the dying millionaire who had once refused all treatment, was no longer just a patient. He was a man redeemed by love, family, and the courage of a doctor, who dared to break the rules for the sake of compassion.